Good evening, and welcome to the City of Glendale Civil Service Commission of August 27th, 2008. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Devine?
Here.
Commissioner Coleman?
Here.
Chair Carrion?
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Gantis and Commissioner Manukian are absent.
The next item is reading of the minutes, and we are going to postpone that because Commissioner Gantis is not here and we don't have a quorum. I was not here at the last meeting. So, and the only reason I'm taking over the meeting is because Chair Abkarian has got bad allergies and he asked me to do it. And I think we'll just pause for a couple of minutes till Commissioner Gantis is here. We'll proceed with next item, please. Reading of the minutes.
Reading of the minutes.
I move to accept as presented and waive reading.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Commissioner Coleman?
Abstain.
Commissioner Gantis?
Yes.
Chair Carrion?
Yes.
Next item, please.
Oral communications.
I have no cards. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to the commission? Being the case, okay. Oral communications is closed. Next item, please.
Eligible list established.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, the item before you are the eligible lists established since our last meeting. As you can see, there are approximately 7 lists that have been established. 6 of them happen to be police department related, 1 from the Parks Department. As is common with this report, it does have the list of the full number of applications received for each of these openings, as well as the total number that ended up on the eligibility list. If there's any questions you have, I'd be happy to try and answer them. This is just a note and file item.
Any questions? Hearing none. Okay. Next item, please.
Report on hourly employment.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is our semi-annual report on hourly employment here at the City of Glendale. We present this report at the midpoint of each fiscal year and at the end of each fiscal year, largely to ensure that departments are complying with the rules that have been imposed by the Commission in the last few years relative to the hiring of hourly employees here. This report addresses the efforts that have been made over the past few years to ensure largely that our hourly employees aren't supplanting salaried employees in positions and that they're not worked in a full-time or near full-time capacity. The main element of this report is the listing of positions that have exceeded the established standard of 1,250 hours in the fiscal year. This report shows the full listing of those employees by title, not by name, for the 2007-2008 fiscal year, and it indicates that in that year there were a total of 64 employees who exceeded the 1,250-hour threshold. Of these, 54 were granted exemption by the City Manager's Office for various operational reasons, leaving 10 that were out of compliance. Those that are exempted, I'll remind the Commission that those are addressed personally by Ms. Yasmin Beers, who's Deputy City Manager. And there's always very appropriate reasons for those being exempted, most of which you'll see have to do with either specific programs that are grant funded for temporary periods of time. The big one is the youth employment program and community development and housing, which again is, the employees are brought into that for a limited duration, usually 2 to 3 years. Then they're transitioned on to, hopefully, to other full-time jobs, either within the organization or elsewhere. So those in generally are exempted. The library pages are exempted just simply by the nature of their work. The IS department has several exemptions relating to, these are people who largely act as a consultant capacity for some of our more significant information systems. Anyway, in large part, we have seen over the years the total number of hourlies that have exceeded this 1,250 hours go down. The very first year we kept records on this, we had 194 that exceeded it. The following year it went down to 175, then it went down to 64. Last year was 67, and then this year we're back at 64. As far as those that are out of compliance, there's really no excuse. Those were oversights for the most part. The records, just the supervision in that department were unable to keep track of hours for one reason or another. No excuses for that. They were non-intentional, but that did occur. And we do have some of those supervisors here tonight if you require any further explanation. In closing, I do want to say departments have in large part been very cooperative with the changes that have taken place in regard to hourly employment. We've gotten a lot of cooperation and a lot of compliance. And for the most part, we've seen a lot of success in this program. I do want to add before I close here that Ms. Beers has done an exceptional job policing this. She is not here tonight. Unfortunately, she would like to have been here, but she is in a master's degree program. It's an intensive program where she just really isn't allowed to miss any classes. If she does, she gets doctorate grade, and so that's where she's at. We don't want that to be any indication of her commitment to this program. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions for you.
Well, I have one comment and a couple of questions. First of all, kudos to the city manager and human resources. Within 2 years, we went from 194 to 64 hourly employees that exceeded the 1,250-hour limit, and we're right at 64 as we speak. And I think it's very commendable, and that also includes all the department heads for doing such a fine job. I just wanted clarification on a couple of things. Under the community development and housing, the housing section, the very first one, the city resource specialist, exempted by city manager, and the reason is an ongoing need for fraud inspector for Section 8 program. And my question really is, if there's an ongoing need for this position, is there a specific reason as to why this has not been converted to full-time permanent because of an ongoing need?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, there is an ongoing need, but it's in the judgment of the management of that section, it's not a full-time need for that particular position. In fact, the individual in that, my understanding is that he is a retired law enforcement individual who conducts these, and it really wouldn't be compatible with probably his retirement needs and his lifestyle, along with really the needs of the department. As you see, he put in 1,439 hours in the last year. A full-time salaried employee is roughly 2,080 hours. So again, the department has not traditionally seen the need to make that a full-time position. That's rather more like a three-quarter type position.
And the 8 city resource specialists that we have listed here, are all basically assigned to special projects, and when the project is finished, they're separated?
That is correct. Some of these projects do go on, though.
Okay.
Many of them, the city resource specialists in our IT department, these are high-priced, very, very talented consultant types. If we were to go to the outside and try to get consultants for this, it would probably cost us $200 an hour or even more. And so we are paying a lot for some very talented people, but their preference is to work in the
And even though they're extremely talented, with a great deal of expertise, they are considered hourly employees eligible for overtime?
That would depend on the level. In most cases, the city resource specialist level, they're at a level to where I would not say that they would be considered rank and file. What determines if someone is eligible for overtime has to do with whether they're any professional, administrative, or managerial capacity. And many of the higher paid individuals, I wouldn't say, or I would say fall in that capacity and thus should not be receiving overtime. The lower paid ones, absolutely.
Okay.
So.
And lastly, and it's a request, and I don't know if it's possible, but in the next report, I would like a breakdown of the overtime for any hourly employees that do exceed the 1,250 hour limit.
Okay.
I don't know, I'm not sure if that's in our preview, but it would give us it would give me a better idea of what's going on with these particular individuals.
Okay.
Okay?
Try and get that information.
Yeah.
I also would like to get a understanding, if possible, if right next to it we can write how many years these people have been in this position for that many hours. If somebody's working 6 years for $20.98 on an hourly basis, we have some problems. So maybe put right next to it I don't know, I'm just picking a name, City Resources Specialist that does $14.39. If they've been doing this for 6 years, $14.39, that person's working full-time. It acts like a duck, quacks like a duck. It probably is a duck. So we want to make sure that we don't replace somebody who needs to take civil service, go through the civil service process to make sure that there's competitive resources and competitive testing, and we don't replace that with a manager and a director who basically want that particular section to be open for an hourly worker for years and years. So if you can just write next to it how many years this city resources specialist have worked $14.39 or over the 1,200, that will give us a better idea as to what's going on.
Okay. And again, as per my comments to Vice Chair Coleman, 1439 hours in a fiscal year does not constitute full-time. Generally, full-time, you're talking about 2,100 hours. So
I understand, but
even if there is an ongoing need for someone to work in a half-time capacity or even a three-quarter time capacity, we're not talking about someone working in a full-time capacity. The positions that are 1,900, 2,000, 2,100 hours, those are truly full-time hours.
okay, why don't we do that then? Why don't we get the ones that are over 1,900? This way, then that will narrow it down just to a few
Okay.
that's on the list, and that would be true indication of somebody who's almost full time.
We can do that. Then that makes it a lot easier.
I appreciate it.
I will say again, many of these people, particularly those, if you look in the IT section, simply don't want to be full-time salaried employees with the city of Glendale. They the benefits would be nice, but given their talents, we'd probably have to pay some of them more than the city manager, given that.
I think it also should be noted that, the 10 employees that were non-compliant, they all worked for the Civic Auditorium event. They worked as Civic Auditorium event attendants. And they didn't go over the majority of them certainly didn't go over the 1,250 benchmark by much at all. I mean, one was 1,255 hours, another was 1,255 hours, another was 1,253 hours. So I don't see a major problem there.
I almost didn't want to put them on the list, but I thought, no, we got some of them are just a few hours above.
And Mr. Vice Chair, in response to your question, excuse me, I think I caught what Commissioner Abkarian has. In response to your question as to the purview, you do have purview over temporary employees to make sure that they meet the criterion of the Charter and the Civil Service rules.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right. Once again, good job. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, budget administrator.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item is the class specification for the newly established classification of budget administrator. Over the course of the last fiscal year, the city manager made a strong push to apply more resources to the budget function. In so doing, he recommended that a separate budget unit be established within the Finance Department, and within that budget unit that a full-time managerial position be in charge of that particular function. Upon the appointment of our new Finance Director, Mr. Elliott, who is here, he of course concurs with that recommendation, and City Council has approved the establishment of the classification of budget administrator, and it was thus placed in the salary ordinance for the last, as of July 1st. Again, this position will be overseeing the all-important budget process. Upon your approval, we will conduct a promotional recruitment for this position. Hopefully we can open the bulletin next week and proceed on with the plan. With that, if you have any questions, be happy to try and answer them. Mr. Elliott is here to answer any questions, as is Ms. Martin from my staff, who put together the job specification. So, Mr. Chair?
I have one question, and very briefly. Either Mr. Doyle or...
It's Mr. Elliott.
It's clearly an exempt position. And in the background section, it's indicated that even though this position is exempt from the GMA, the GMA was notified and expressed no concerns. My question is, why is this individual, when he or she is selected, going to be exempt from the GMA?
I can answer that,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. And the term exempt, you're aware of FLSA exempt, and
yes.
and that's not what we're talking about. This position is FLSA exempt,
What?
exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act, therefore not eligible for overtime. But in this regard, this has been exempted from the Management Employee Association simply because this individual is going to have some input on the negotiation process when we sit down and negotiate with the GMA. We will likely have this person perhaps do some costing or provide figures. There are a number of other employees within finance and mostly my department who are just simply, it's not appropriate for us to belong to the GMA.
That answers that
because
question.
they'll have some inside information on different negotiation strategies and things like that. So,
Thank you. Answers my
It'd be
question.
good for GMA to have insider trading.
Any other questions, comments?
How many staff works for this individual, or will work for this individual?
The proposed staffing will be 4, including the budget administrator as a separate section of the finance department. And I think a preliminary org chart was attached in that.
I see that, but they don't have the numbers there.
Well, we haven't got completely reorganized yet. I'm in the process of doing that. But and one thing I'd like to add, and Mr. Doyle spoke to it, is the need for the budget process, but this also includes year-long budget monitoring and development and revenue enhancements, and it's a very broad scope position that, frankly, an organization with a $750 million budget really needs to have. So,
Is there a person in your organization now that's doing the duties of that?
there is an individual that's basically been on loan since before I started here as an acting capacity, and she's continuing in the acting capacity until we go through the process.
She currently, Mr. Chairperson,
Certainly.
she currently a full-time employee of the city?
Yes, she's on loan from internal.
On loan from where?
Internal audit.
Any other questions?
Move for approval?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Commissioner Coleman?
Yes.
Commissioner Gantis?
Yes.
Chair Perrin?
Next item, please.
Agenda forecast?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, before you is the agenda forecast for upcoming meetings. The next meeting, we have an item to address involving the authority and process for the commission to hire outside counsel. And I believe Mr. Braden wants to add something to that.
Well, I don't want to add anything, but I believe certain commissioners want to add something. So, as I understand it, is the other item is a jurisdiction of the commission related to investigations of the rules, the authority of the commission to investigate the rules of the efficiency of the service under the charter.
What does that mean?
Well, as I understand it, the question that has been periodically raised since my opinion of 2004 is that there's certain beliefs by some commission members that the commission has broader authority to make investigations related to the rules of the efficiency of service, broader than what I indicated in that 2004 opinion, and that they wanted that issue revisited.
And when would you like to include that?
Well, September 10th is fine. I'm working on it now.
Okay.
Let me make sure that we don't know who that individuals are, but
I do.
I do too.
but not knowing who they are, let me just throw something out there. I think that it should be a general discussion as to the right of the Civil Service Commission to do investigations, period. And then if you want to sub it into what does it mean to say efficiency of service, what rights do they have as to investigations, what does that mean, why was efficiency of service actually included in the charter if we weren't supposed to do anything. So all of that, I would keep it general so we can discuss it all.
All right. Just with this caveat, I mean, I will do the best I can in terms of researching the issue, but I'm not sure that I'll be able to research all of the unknown questions the commission may have regarding that.
And we can, I mean, Mr. Chairman,
Certainly.
I think we can then revisit, I mean, if there's questions where you haven't answered or we weren't satisfied, or not we were satisfied, but that you hadn't answered, then I think we can set another date and we can come back again and then just flush those out. I don't think there's any reason for us to just say, okay, if we don't do everything by September 10th, that this whole thing is dead. So I would like to just say, what is our investigative rights? How far could it go? When would we be crossing that line? So really, I want to know so we don't cross the line.
Okay.
Well, maybe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we can add one thing to that what needs to be done if we need to or want to cross the line. In other words, what action would have to take place if, based on your information to us, we feel that we want to expand or go beyond that. Something to the effect telling us, the Commission, what they would need to do to go beyond or expand our current authority.
And what the ramifications of doing so would be.
Whether it takes a charter change, council action, all the things that the process we would need to go through to do that. And also, I've heard mentioned several times this famous ruling you came up with in 2004, I think it was. And I don't know if Mr. Coleman was here, but I wasn't here, and I wondered if we could get a copy of that to all the commissioners so we could kind of read it beforehand and see where you're coming from on that issue.
Well, I was planning to attach it to my report. If you would like to have a copy, I can ship that out in advance.
Yeah, I for one, would appreciate it. I can't speak for the other commissioners.
All right, I will do that.
I do have a copy, but I think it would be nice to just resend it to everyone.
And if you like, I will also, there's some other somewhat corollary opinions. I'll include those too.
Very good. Anything else on that? Next item, please.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure we have the right wording for this item. Give it a shot, Ron?
I do.
Okay.
I understand.
Okay.
I'll work with Cassandra and,
Okay.
Sandra, I'm sorry, getting the wording for the agenda item.
All right. Next item, please.
Reports and information.
Any reports or information? Next item, please.
Civil Service Commission and our staff comments.
Any commission comments? Yes.
Little as I wanted to talk, I feel strongly about two issues that I wanted to mention today. One, one is that if an employee of the City of Glendale, employee of the City of Glendale comes in a hearing and lies to the Civil Service Commission in a hearing, I will guarantee you that there's going to be severe consequences to that individual, as far as I'm concerned, personally. Second, if an employee comes and testifies in front of Civil Service Commission and there are punitive action taken against them, I will personally hold whoever does that accountable as well. I want to make it short and clean, and that's all I wanted to say about that. Thank you so much.
When you say personally, you mean in your position as Civil Service Commissioner?
Yes. I just didn't want to talk on behalf of anyone else except a Civil Service Commissioner, because I haven't discussed this with anyone else. So I just wanted to make my position as a Civil Service Commissioner very, very clear as to those two issues. Somebody lies in front of us, they're in big trouble, and somebody testifies truthfully and honestly in front of us, and there's punitive action taken against them. I will do everything I can as a Civil Service Commissioner to make sure that that does not ever, ever happen in the City of Glendale.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My question would be, in both instances, what can Mr. Abkarian personally as a Civil Service Commissioner and/or Mr. Gantis and/or all commissioners do in either of those instances? And maybe we should get answers to those questions, because, as I understand it, we're kind of hamstrung on what we can do in either of those instances. And then I would suggest that we also find out whether or not we can do anything to give us any teeth, or what it takes to give teeth to do either, to implement either of those ramifications that were articulated by Mr. Commissioner Abkarian. That would be my recommendation, because as I understand it, we can do little, and we've discussed that, as you all know, and have seen some of that, and I would like to know where we can go with it, because it's very disturbing. It's a very disturbing thing. Mr. Abkarian's brought up an excellent point on both counts. They're disturbing, and we really are kind of guessing what we can do.
I personally have lost sleep over it.
So I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, unless anybody disagrees, that we have a report back, I assume by our attorney, as in those two areas, unless anybody disagrees with that.
Absolutely not. I don't.
Well, I was going to say the same thing, only John beat me to it. And no, I agree 100% both with Commissioner Abkarian's comments and Mr. Gantis's follow-up on that. I would support a motion, if that's what it takes, to get a report to let us know what we need to do in those instances and how we do it.
And we have that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Might I suggest we do that for October 8th? There's nothing on our agenda. That should give you enough time. I don't think this is a real complicated issue, is it, Ron?
Yeah, you never know until you get into them.
Well, if it is, you'll come back and tell us then. I want to get on this immediately because it's an immediate problem. Unless anybody disagrees.
October 8th.
So it's done for October 8th?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do want to make a comment. We had a very unfortunate situation in our neighboring city of Burbank. Some of you may have heard, but there was a fatality involving a city employee, sewer maintenance worker for the city of Burbank, a 23-year employee within their public works department, Joseph Cordero, and he was a husband, father, and very unfortunate accident that occurred on the job, and it just serves as a constant reminder that our employees are very valuable. It's not just the police and fire department that are exposed to the hazards in the workplace, and would like to see if we can conclude this meeting in his memory.
So be it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up on that, we all get these emails every month about the service awards of our employees, is mentioning that. And I personally take them seriously because I think it's important that we recognize our employees. And the beauty of them, this month we had one 35-year employee. We had Ms. Hunanian, who's been here 5 years. She's are you a licensed attorney? I know you graduated. She's a licensed attorney, but she's chosen to stay with HR and done a fabulous job. And for 5 years, we have a lot of long-term employees in that capacity, as well as doing sewer maintenance, they climb the poles and take care of the lines. And I, for one, am amazed at the quality of the employees that we have here and the length of time we have them stay here. Clearly, that's a tribute, I think, to the city, a tribute to our employees and their fellow workers. And I think it's always a good point, and this, unfortunately, a death brings it up. But
Are you running for city council?
no, I'm not. Thanks for asking. Maybe president. I don't know.
I would assume we moved to staff comments.
Oh, have we? I'm sorry.
Any other comments? All right, that concludes our open session. We are now going to go into closed session. And once again, Mr. Braden, are we reporting out?
I would anticipate reporting out on one item.
Thank you very much.
We are.
But that item would not be televised?
Not be televised.
Thank you.